Maxwell thought nothing could be worse than discovering his wife's betrayal, until he found an abandoned baby on his doorstep. What happens next will change his life forever. Stay tuned to uncover the full story. Hello, welcome, enjoy, subscribe, and activate notifications. Maxwell arrived home earlier than usual, exhausted from a grueling day at work. Yet, all he desired was to spend time with his wife, Lillian. Upon entering, he placed his keys on the hallway table and heard the soothing sound of water running in the bathroom. Lillian was showering. "Hello, love. I'm home. How are you?" he called out as he moved towards the bedroom. "Doing well, my dear. Just showering. I'll be out soon." Lillian's calm voice echoed from the bathroom. As Maxwell passed by the dresser in the hallway, a slightly ajar drawer caught his eye. It was a minor detail, but enough to pique his curiosity. Peeking out was an old notebook he didn't recall seeing before. With a mix of curiosity and intrigue, he pulled open the drawer. Inside was a diary, evidently Lillian's. Though not one to snoop, the disarray it was kept in tempted him. Flipping it open, a folded piece of paper slipped out. Instinctively, he picked it up and unfolded it, and the contents took his breath away. A gynecologist's appointment for Lillian about an implant of a contraceptive device scheduled for 5 years, dated just after their honeymoon. Maxwell's heart pounded. What did this mean? They had been trying to start a family for years, or so he thought. Lillian always seemed evasive whenever he brought up the topic of children, but he never suspected a hidden reason behind it. Stashing the paper back into the diary, he closed the drawer just as Lillian emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, all smiles. "How was your day?" she asked, planting a kiss on his cheek. Maxwell managed to smile, though his mind raced with the discovery. "It was fine, just tiring," he replied, striving to sound casual as Lillian dressed. Resting on the bed, Maxwell's mind was a whirlwind. Lillian, the heir to a considerable fortune and known for her straightforward but loving nature, had been part of his life for 5 years. They discussed kids early in their relationship, and she always seemed agreeable, yet something always got in the way. Trips, obligations, never the perfect moment, she would say. But now, the truth seemed much darker. Had Lillian never intended to fulfill those plans? Why choose a long-term contraceptive right after their wedding? What did that imply for their relationship, and what else might she be hiding? As Lillian finished dressing and began her evening routine at the vanity, Maxwell realized that rather than confront her, he needed more information. He needed to understand how deep Lillian's deception ran. He couldn't just dive into a confrontation without knowing the full extent of what was happening. Turning around with a smile as if nothing was wrong, Lillian's act hurt Maxwell deeply. That night, as she slept beside him, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering about the lies and secrets of the woman he had shared his life with for years. The next morning, routine seemed normal as Lillian got up early, dressed in one of her expensive outfits, and headed to the gym as she did almost every day. "See you later, love," she said with a smile and a quick kiss before leaving, oblivious to Maxwell's inner turmoil. As he watched her leave, Maxwell decided he couldn't ignore the situation any longer. The doubt was eating at him. It was then he decided to track Lillian's movements, at least to better understand what was happening. He called his trusted chauffeur, Martin, a loyal man who had been with the family for years. "Martin, I need a favor," Maxwell said in a serious tone. "Keep an eye on the places Lillian goes and report anything unusual. I don't want to raise suspicions, but I need to know what she's up to." Martin didn't ask questions. He had always respected Maxwell's privacy, but he could tell something serious was up. That same day, while Lillian was at the gym, Martin called. "Mr. Maxwell, Mrs. Lillian asked me to take her to a hotel after the gym. Something seemed off. She stopped at the entrance and asked me to wait, but she didn't go up to any room. I saw her talking to someone at the reception, but couldn't make out who." A chill ran down Maxwell's spine. It wasn't typical of Lillian to meet up at hotels without telling him. What could she be hiding? The doubt intensified, and he decided he needed to see for himself. "Stay there, Martin," he said firmly. "I'm on my way." Maxwell left the house quickly, his mind full of conflicting thoughts. The traffic was heavy, and with every passing second, his anxiety grew. When he finally arrived at the hotel, He parked a few meters from the entrance, far enough not to be noticed by Lillian. Entering the lobby, his heart pounding, he looked around and saw her standing in a corner, talking to a man who, at first glance, appeared ordinary. But Maxwell's instinct told him something wasn't right. He moved close enough to overhear part of their conversation without being seen. "Same place tomorrow?" asked the man, who was none other than the gym trainer. Lillian agreed with a complicit smile. A mix of rage and pain filled Maxwell's chest. Lillian was betraying him, sharing their home, their dreams, lying in the most vile way. He asked Martin to be extra vigilant the next day and capture everything. The loyal chauffeur discreetly recorded the exact moment Lillian arrived at the hotel with her trainer, captured them entering a room together, and later, exiting with complicit laughter. The evidence was there, undeniable. Maxwell didn't confront Lillian immediately. He decided to wait until their anniversary. Lillian had been planning a big celebration, inviting friends and family, completely unaware of what Maxwell had discovered. He, on the other hand, planned his own surprise for that night. The final blow came on the day of the party. Lillian was radiant, dressed in one of her most elegant outfits, enjoying the attention from everyone present. Maxwell watched from a distance, his expression calm, but his insides burning. The plan was in motion, and soon everything would explode. During the dinner, as all the guests gathered to toast to 5 years of marriage, Lillian stood with her glass in hand, smiling. She thanked everyone for being there and began talking about how fortunate she felt to have found someone like Maxwell. He, with a lump in his throat, waited for the right moment. "And now, to make this moment even more special, I want everyone to see a video that reminds us of one of the happiest days of our lives," said Maxwell, with a smile that hid the storm that was coming. "The day of our wedding." The guests applauded, excited by the idea. The lights in the hall dimmed, and a large screen lit up. Initially, everything seemed normal. The footage showed the moment Lillian walked down the aisle, smiling and radiant. But suddenly, the video changed. The laughter died down when the screen showed a completely different recording. It was Lillian, dressed in gym clothes, entering a hotel. Alongside her, a man that many immediately recognized, her trainer. The camera clearly showed them walking towards the reception, conversing complicitly. Then, the scene shifted to the hotel hallway and finally to the door of a room. The couple disappeared behind the door, and the video cut off. A murmur of confusion swept through the room. Lillian was petrified, not knowing how to react. The faces of the guests filled with disbelief, all looking at her, waiting for some explanation, but she couldn't utter a single word. Her face turned pale, and a sense of vertigo overwhelmed her. It was then that Maxwell stood up, took the microphone, and broke the silence. "I'm sorry, friends, what you just saw was not a mistake. This video is part of what has been my life for the last few months," he said with a disturbing calm in his voice. "Lillian, I want you to know that I can no longer be with a woman who has lied, cheated, and betrayed me. I cannot continue living with someone like you. You are a whore." Lillian's eyes filled with tears. She tried to approach him, but Maxwell stepped back. "Maxwell, please don't do this," she pleaded, her voice breaking. But he had already made up his mind. There was no turning back. The room was silent, all eyes on Lillian and Maxwell. "I want a divorce," Maxwell declared firmly. "I cannot continue with someone who has done what you have done. And to make it clear to everyone, our relationship ends tonight." Without waiting any longer, he left the microphone on the table and walked out in his car, leaving Lillian alone in her public humiliation. The guests were in shock. No one could believe what had just happened. Lillian's tears were not enough to repair the damage. The days that followed were chaos. News of the scandal at the anniversary party spread like wildfire throughout the city. Lillian, publicly humiliated, tried to make amends with Maxwell, but he didn't want to hear her excuses or her pleas. It was over for her forever, and he had already signed the divorce papers. Maxwell, despite the betrayal, maintained his external calm. Inside, he was still torn between pain and rage, but he didn't let it control him. He had made a decision, and now all he wanted was to move on with his life. It was then that, months after their separation, something completely unexpected happened. Maxwell was returning home late one night after a long day at work. As he approached the entrance of his mansion, a sound stopped him in his tracks. It was the heartbreaking cry of a baby. "Do you hear that?" he asked Martin, who was driving the car. "Yes, sir. It's coming from outside," the chauffeur replied, turning his head toward the entrance. They both got out of the car and walked towards the sound. There, at the entrance of the mansion, a small box was placed on the ground. Inside, a baby wrapped in a blanket was crying desperately. Maxwell knelt beside the box and carefully lifted the baby. His heart raced. How had it gotten there? Alongside the baby, a crumpled note read, "I can't take care of it right now. I know it will be better off with you." Maxwell couldn't believe what he was seeing. Who had left the baby there? Why had they chosen him? "Martin, check the surroundings. There has to be someone nearby," said Maxwell, still in shock. Martin ran in all directions, but he found no one. The baby had been abandoned at the entrance of the mansion without anyone noticing. Maxwell entered the house with the baby in his arms, his mind full of questions. What did all this mean? This little being had appeared in his life in the most unexpected way, and although he didn't know what he was going to do, there was something in its eyes, something in that innocence, that deeply moved him. "Martin, first thing tomorrow, I want you to find out if there is any information about an abandoned baby in the area. I want to know who this child is and why it was left here," said Maxwell, without taking his eyes off the little one. Maxwell looked at the small baby now in the arms of Maria, the housekeeper. As she gently rocked it, trying to calm its crying, the note left alongside the baby continued to echo in his head. Who could be the mother of this creature? What circumstances could have led a woman to leave her child in this manner? He couldn't get the simple yet painful phrase out of his head. "I know it will be better off with you." The baby continued to cry, and the heartbreaking sound pierced the silence of the mansion. "Martin, go to the nearest store immediately and buy everything this child might need. Diapers, clothes, bottles, formula milk, whatever it takes. Spare no expense," ordered Maxwell with a firm but gentle voice. Martin obeyed without hesitation and quickly left the house, knowing his boss was facing something completely new. As the door closed behind the chauffeur, Maxwell approached Maria and, without thinking twice, extended his arms. "Let me try," he said. Maria passed the baby to him with care, and as soon as Maxwell held it in his arms, something changed. The little one's eyes opened slowly, staring at him intently, as if searching his face for signs of comfort and safety. In that moment, Maxwell felt something he hadn't felt in years. Holding that baby reminded him of what he had always wanted: a family, a child to love, protect, and guide. A desire that had been frustrated by Lillian, who had kept her deception hidden both in her refusal to have children and in her love life. Yet now, in the most unexpected way, that sense of connection, of paternal love, was there. He couldn't explain it, but he felt that this little being had chosen him just as he was beginning to feel a special bond. The baby's cry softened, and everything will be all right. The baby seemed to understand his words. Maria, from a corner of the room, smiled slightly at the scene. She knew that this baby had arrived at a crucial moment in Maxwell's life, and although she didn't fully understand what it meant, she could see something light up in her employer's eyes. Martin returned quickly, loaded with bags full of diapers, clothes, and everything necessary for the baby. He approached Maxwell and offered him the freshly prepared bottle. "Here you go, sir. This is what they recommended at the store for a baby of his age." Maria quickly prepared the bottle, and Maxwell took it with care, bringing it to the baby's mouth. The little one instinctively began to suck eagerly. As the baby drank, Maxwell couldn't help but smile. This was the moment he had been waiting for a long time. He wanted to be a father, and although this baby wasn't his, something in his heart told him that this child had come into his life for a reason. The baby drank the entire bottle without taking its eyes off Maxwell. That connection, though inexplicable, was real. He felt his heart open in a way he had never experienced before. There was no anger, no betrayal, just this little being in him, sharing a moment of peace amid the chaos. When the baby finished eating, Maxwell gently laid it on his shoulder, patting its small back to help it burp. He did it with a tenderness he never thought he would be capable of showing. He rose slowly and began to walk around the room, swaying gently as the baby yawned, exhausted by the effort. "You are everything I've ever wanted, little one. I never thought this moment would come in this way," Maxwell whispered, continuing to walk. "But who are you? Where do you come from?" The questions continued to haunt his mind, but what he did know was that at that moment, he couldn't stop feeling that destiny had played an unexpected card. If you're enjoying this story, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and like it so we can continue creating content like this. Thank you for your support, and let's continue with the story. As he gently placed the baby in a small, makeshift crib that Maria had prepared, Maxwell realized that his life had taken an unexpected turn. He still didn't know how to handle it, but at that moment, with the baby sleeping in the mansion, he knew there was no turning back. This little being, who had arrived in the most unpredictable way, had filled a void in Maxwell's life that he hadn't even known still existed. "Welcome home, little one," Maxwell murmured before turning off the lights. In the dimness of the night, for the first time in a long time, Maxwell felt at peace. The sun began to filter through the mansion's curtains, filling the room with a warm morning light. Maxwell woke up after a restless night. After feeding the baby every 3 hours, he had conflicting thoughts and mixed emotions. The baby slept peacefully in the makeshift crib by his side, as if it had no idea of the chaos it had caused by entering his life. Maxwell watched it sleep, pondering what to do. Calling the authorities was the logical, correct thing to do, but at the same time, the mere idea of handing over the baby filled him with uncertainty. He knew nothing about its origins or why it had been left at his door, but what he did know was that he felt a deep connection with it. The little one moved, slowly opening its eyes, and when their gazes met again, Maxwell felt something inside him surrender completely. He couldn't let it go. "Good morning, little one," Maxwell murmured with a smile as he approached the crib. "Are you hungry?" Almost as if it understood, the baby began to move restlessly, making small whimpers. At that moment, Maria appeared in the room with the bottle ready. "Here you go, sir. It's all prepared," the woman said, extending it maternally. Maxwell, without hesitating, took it and brought it close to the baby. The little one sucked eagerly, clinging to the bottle, and Maxwell couldn't take his eyes off it. "Maria, I think I'll stay home with him today," said Maxwell after a few seconds. "I need time to think about what to do." Maria nodded, watching him with understanding. "I understand, sir. This child has come into your life unexpectedly, but it seems that something special connects you." Maxwell didn't respond immediately. He simply continued feeding the baby, feeling that every moment spent with it reinforced that invisible bond that had begun to form. The little one finished the bottle and kept looking at Maxwell with those little eyes full of innocence, as if it knew he was its protector. Throughout the day, Maxwell decided to stay home, attending to the baby and enjoying its company. Each time he held it, he felt that the weight of the decisions that needed to be made was lighter. But as night fell, reality began to impose itself. He couldn't keep the baby forever alone. His business required his attention, and although he could work from home, he needed help. That night, sitting in his office, Maxwell reflected in silence. He couldn't ignore the situation. The baby needed constant care, and although Maria did everything possible, he knew he couldn't give her more responsibilities. Maria already had enough work in the house and couldn't be in charge of the child full-time. While looking out the window at the dark gardens of his mansion, Maxwell made a decision. He needed help. The next day, he would call his personal assistant, Clara, to help him find someone specialized in baby care. Someone trustworthy who could take care of the little one while he continued with his work responsibilities. But that night, while the baby slept in the crib by his side, Maxwell felt an unexpected calm. Although he knew the situation was complicated, one thing was clear. He would not leave that child to his fate. Something in his heart told him that the little one had come into his life for a reason, and he was determined to protect it, take care of it, and do everything possible to ensure it had a secure and loving future. The next morning, when the sun was just beginning to light up the house, Maxwell got up, determined. He walked over to the crib and gently stroked the baby's sleeping head. "Little one, we'll find someone to take care of you while I do what's necessary to secure your future," he whispered with a faint smile. "I promise you'll be okay." Maxwell made a couple of calls, one to Clara, his efficient assistant, and another to his lawyer. He knew he had to act legally in case someone came to claim the child. He didn't want any surprises. As Clara arrived at the house to help him, Maxwell returned to the living room, where the baby was beginning to wake up. Every time he saw it, his heart softened even more. Shortly after, Clara entered the room with her usual efficiency and professionalism. She knew that if there was anything Maxwell needed, she would quickly resolve it. "Clara, I need your help finding a trustworthy person who can take care of the baby while I work. Someone who has experience and is discreet," he explained calmly while holding the little one in his arms. Clara nodded immediately. "Of course, sir. I'll make some calls and bring you options so you can choose the best candidate." Maxwell thanked her, knowing he could trust Clara to resolve this matter. At the end of the day, when night began to fall, Maxwell sat on the balcony of his mansion with the baby sleeping in his arms. The world seemed calm, and for the first time in a long time, Maxwell also felt at peace. In a humble neighborhood of the city, Lucia, a young woman of just 26 years, looked sadly at the small room that had been her home for the last few years. Her life had changed completely when she received the hardest news imaginable: cancer. The news came when she was 5 months pregnant, and although the doctor suggested terminating the pregnancy to begin chemotherapy immediately, Lucia made a decision that would change everything. "I can't do that to my baby," she thought repeatedly as tears slid down her face. The little one growing inside her was all she had left, the only thing that gave her the strength to keep going. She decided to continue with the pregnancy, even knowing that delaying treatment could cost her her life. She had been abandoned by the father of her child when he learned of her illness. With no support network, no mother, and an uncertain future, Lucia faced the most difficult reality. She knew she didn't have much time left, and each day that passed, the pain increased and her strength weakened. One day, while Lucia was in the hospital waiting room, she overheard 2 nurses talking about a powerful and generous man who had created a foundation for people with cancer. They called him Maxwell, a man who had gone through a painful divorce because his wife didn't want to give him children, although he deeply desired them. Lucia didn't know him personally, but something in that conversation sparked a small light of hope in her heart. What better person to raise her child than someone who had shown so much love and compassion for others, and also had the necessary resources to ensure that her little one grew up safe and loved? The idea stayed in her mind for days. At first, it seemed crazy, but as time passed and her health deteriorated, the idea gained strength. Lucia began to investigate more about Maxwell. She learned that he lived in a large mansion and that despite being betrayed by his ex-wife, his love for children was profound. And if her child could have the future she couldn't give him, the decision was not easy. Lucia loved her baby more than her own life, and leaving him was the most painful thing she had ever had to face. But the love she felt for him was so great that she was willing to sacrifice herself for his well-being. She knew she couldn't take care of him while she fought her illness, and every day, the battle seemed harder. One night, after several weeks of reflection, Lucia packed a small bag with the few items her baby had used until then. She included a blanket she had knitted with her trembling hands and placed a letter next to it explaining her decision. That same night, she left her small apartment and took a taxi to the businessman's mansion. It was late, and the streets were empty when she reached her destination. The driver looked at her curiously, but she simply got out with tears in her eyes. Lucia carefully placed her baby in a small box at the entrance of the mansion. She stroked his little head with tenderness, knowing this would be the last time she would see him. The baby, as if he understood what was happening, looked at her with those innocent eyes, and for a moment, Lucia felt as if the entire world had stopped. "I love you, my little one. I will always love you," she whispered with a broken voice. After placing the letter next to the baby, with her heart shattered, she hid to wait for Maxwell to arrive. When he did, she watched as he got out of the vehicle and took the baby in his arms. The pain she felt was unbearable, but deep in her heart, she knew her son would be in better hands. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Maxwell. From the moment he found the baby at his doorstep, something changed in him. Although the initial bewilderment overwhelmed him, soon the feeling of responsibility and affection for the little one grew. He knew he couldn't continue his life as before. His work was still important, but this baby had somehow become the center of his universe. 2 days later, Maxwell was in his office, looking at the garden from the window. Outside, Clara was receiving the woman who had come for the interview as the baby's nanny. Maxwell had admitted that he needed help to balance his professional and personal life. Although he could manage the businesses from home, the baby required constant attention, and he knew he couldn't do it alone. Clara peeked into the office. "Sir, the candidate has arrived. Should I let her in?" she asked in her usual professional tone. "Yes, Clara, let her in," Maxwell responded as he stood from his desk and adjusted his jacket. The door opened, and a woman in her 40s entered. She had a serene but firm appearance, dressed simply, but her expression showed experience and confidence. Her name was Elena, and she had several years of experience working with children in different families. "Good afternoon, Mr. Maxwell. It's an honor to be here," said Elena with a kind smile. "Thank you for coming, Elena." "Please," Maxwell replied, indicating a chair in front of his desk. Clara had spoken highly of her. As he had already been informed, he found himself in a particularly unusual situation. This little being had arrived in his life unexpectedly, and he wanted to ensure it received the best possible care. Elena nodded. "I've heard your story, sir. I understand the responsibility it entails, and I have the experience to help you with all the needs of the baby," she said confidently. "But I also know that caring for a child requires more than just experience. It needs love and dedication, and I am committed to providing that." Maxwell observed her for a moment, pondering the words he had just heard. Something in Elena's gaze gave him the certainty that she was the right person for the job. "That's exactly what I'm looking for. I need someone who knows how to manage these skills and does it with heart," said Maxwell, his tone softer. "I am determined to raise this child as if it were my own, just like the letter left with him said. The mother of this baby trusted me, and I will not fail her." Elena looked at him, admiring Maxwell's determination. "I assure you, I will treat him as if he were my own son, sir. This little one will have all the care and love he needs." "Perfect. I'd like you to start as soon as possible," said Maxwell, smiling for the first time in days. "Clara will give you all the details and organize everything necessary for you to be comfortable here." Elena nodded and stood up, ready to start immediately. "Thank you for trusting me, Mr. Maxwell. You won't regret it." After saying goodbye, Maxwell remained silent for a moment, processing the decision he had just made. He had taken the first step to organize his life around the baby, and although he felt the burden was great, he also knew it was the right path. A few days later, Elena was already installed in the mansion, and the atmosphere had noticeably changed. The baby was calmer and under Elena's expert care, while Maxwell could focus on his work. However, each day, he spent more time with the child, enjoying moments he had never imagined having. "Every day teaches me something new," Maxwell commented as he looked at the baby with tenderness. "I never thought I could feel this way about someone so small. That's what parenthood does, sir. It reaches deep into your being, even when it's unplanned," Elena replied with a knowing smile. Maxwell nodded, moved by Elena's words. "You're right. And to think that all this happened in the most unexpected way, but I'm determined. This child deserves a full life, and I'll do everything possible to give it to him," he replied with determination. Suddenly, the baby let out a giggle as if understanding the conversation. Maxwell and Elena looked at each other, sharing a laugh. "I think he agrees with you, sir," said Elena, laughing softly. Maxwell continued playing with the baby for a while, longer until he started to fall asleep in his arms. "I'll take him to sleep," said Maxwell as he held him carefully and headed to the baby's room. As he cradled the baby, Maxwell whispered, "I will take care of you, little one. You can count on me." 2 years later, the sound of laughter and voices filled the air as colorful balloons adorned the wide garden of the mansion. It was a sunny and perfect day to celebrate the birthday of Matthias, the little one who had unexpectedly arrived in Maxwell's life 2 years earlier. Since then, that baby had changed his entire world. The child now ran among the guests, smiling with his boundless energy, infecting everyone around him. Maxwell watched from a short distance, a mix of pride and emotion in his chest. Matthias, whom they had decided to name in honor of the meaning of the name, Gift of God, had become his greatest joy. Every day with him was a reminder of the unexpected blessing that life had given him. In the letter left with the baby, Lucia, the biological mother, had written the date of birth of the little one, and now, exactly 2 years later, they were celebrating his second birthday. Maxwell had done everything possible to give Matthias a life full of love and security, surrounded by people who cared for him as if he were their own child. The garden was decorated with pennants and children's figures, and a long table filled with sweets and a large cake with 2 candles occupied the center of attention. Matthias couldn't have been more excited. "It's time for the cake," announced Clara with her usual efficiency, but also with a hint of joy in her voice. Maxwell approached the group where Matthias was surrounded by children, some the offspring of friends and family. He crouched down to the level of the little one, who looked at him with those large eyes full of innocence and trust. "Ready to blow out the candles, champ?" he asked Maxwell with a smile. "Yes, Daddy," Matthias replied, stretching his little hands toward the cake. The guests began to sing Happy Birthday, and as the voices filled the garden, Maxwell watched Matthias with profound love. The little one clapped excitedly, waiting eagerly to blow out the 2 candles that adorned the cake. When the song ended, Matthias blew with all his might, and the candles went out amid applause and cheers from the guests. Maxwell lifted the little one into his arms so that everyone could see his smile. "Happy birthday, son," Maxwell whispered, kissing the child's forehead. Matthias hugged him tightly, his little face resting on Maxwell's shoulder. In that moment, Maxwell felt that the world was in its place. This child, who had arrived in his life in the most unexpected way, was now his greatest treasure. Nothing else mattered. Maxwell's parents, who had been watching with eyes shining with emotion, approached the little one with open arms. Maxwell's mother took Matthias in her arms, and the child, with his innocent joy, snuggled into her chest. She hugged him tenderly and, with a voice choked with emotion, said, "My life, we love you so much. You don't know how much happiness you bring us." Maxwell's father, normally reserved, leaned in and gently caressed Matthias's little head, then added with a warm and sincere smile, "You are our little miracle." The child, wrapped in the arms of his grandparents, smiled, not fully understanding the magnitude of their words, but feeling the love that surrounded him. Maxwell watched the scene, moved. His parents had accepted Matthias from the first day and loved him as if he were their own grandson. In their eyes, Maxwell could see the gratitude for the gift that destiny had given them, a new life to love. "Daddy, look," said Matthias, tugging at his hand and pulling him out of his thoughts. Maxwell followed, leaving behind the reflections to focus on what was most important, the present. Matthias was pointing to a huge gift wrapped in brightly colored paper. "Let's open it," said the little one with excitement. Maxwell laughed, letting himself be carried away by the joy of the moment. Today, there was no room for worries or questions about the past. Today was just a day to celebrate the life of Matthias, the greatest gift that destiny had given him. Matthias approached the huge gift, wrapped in brightly colored paper, his little hands trying to tear the paper with enthusiasm while Maxwell helped him discover what was inside. The guests gathered around, curious, and soon a collective sigh was heard when the contents were revealed. A bright red tricycle, perfect for a child his age. "Is it for me?" exclaimed Matthias with a radiant smile, climbing on it immediately, his little feet barely reaching the pedals. "Of course, champ, it's all yours," responded Maxwell with a smile as he gently pushed him, initiating the first tour of the tricycle around the garden. The children applauded, running after him as Matthias laughed nonstop. "Daddy, look how fast I run," shouted the little one, enjoying the moment with overflowing happiness. Maxwell watched, enjoying the innocent joy of his son. The applause and laughter filled the garden, and for a moment, everything seemed perfect. But then something caught his attention in the distance, a woman standing by the garden gate, watching the scene in silence. She wasn't a familiar face among the guests, and her presence unsettled Maxwell. The woman did nothing more than watch, but there was something in her eyes, something deeply sad yet full of hope, that triggered an alert in him. Maxwell quickly excused himself from the guests and walked toward the garden entrance where the solitary figure continued to watch. "Can I help you?" Maxwell asked in a polite yet firm tone. The woman looked at him intently, their gazes meeting. In that instant, he felt a strange connection. Her eyes were full of pain but also love. She didn't need to say much more before the words came out of her mouth. "I'm Lucia. I'm Matthias's mother," she said with a trembling voice. Maxwell's heart stopped for a second. The woman who had left the baby at the entrance of his house 2 years ago. The one who had disappeared without a trace. Everything began to make sense. The look, the nervousness, the pain in her eyes. How is this possible?" Maxwell asked, unable to hide his surprise. "I thought that. I know it's hard to understand," said Lucia, with tears welling up in her eyes. "I left because I had no other choice. I was very sick with cancer, and I couldn't take care of him. But I survived. I got better, thanks to God and to your foundation. I am so grateful for everything you have done for me and my son. I didn't know if I would ever see him again, but I had to try." Maxwell stood in silence, processing Lucia's words. The biological mother of Matthias had returned, claiming a place in her son's life. "I didn't come to..." She tried to find the right words. "Matthias is happy. He's an incredible child," Maxwell finally said. "You gave him life, and in part, you also did what was best for him by leaving him with me. But what do you expect now?" Lucia looked down, nervous. "I just want to get to know him. I don't know if there's a place for me in his life now, but at least I deserve to try. I want him to know who I am. But I don't want to cause him any harm," she said, wiping away the tears now rolling down her cheeks. "I just want to see him up close, see what his life has been like thanks to you." Maxwell saw in Lucia a mix of pain and hope. He knew this was a complicated situation, but he also knew that Matthias deserved to know his story, his origin. He couldn't make hasty decisions, but he also couldn't ignore Lucia's right to see her son. "Let's talk," said Maxwell, more calmly. "We need to prepare Matthias for the meeting. We can't do it suddenly without him understanding it. The most important thing here is to protect him and make sure this is handled in the best possible way for him." Lucia looked at him gratefully, relief and emotion in her eyes. "Thank you, Maxwell. I just want you to know that I expect nothing more than to see him, to know him. I don't want to disrupt his life or cause him confusion. I'll do whatever it takes to make this the best for him. Let's take it slow," she added. Maxwell nodded and prepared to return to the party, where Matthias continued laughing and playing, completely unaware of what had just occurred. Maxwell watched him for a moment, his mind working on how to resolve this new dilemma. One afternoon, while playing in the garden, Maxwell sat down next to Matthias and began to speak to him gently. "Matthias, there's something I want to tell you," he said as the child played with his toys. "There's a very special person who wants to meet you. Someone who has loved you very much since you were born." The child looked at him curiously, not stopping his busy hands on the blocks he held. "Who, Daddy?" Maxwell watched him and continued with a serene smile. "It's your biological mother, the person who gave you life. She couldn't be with you before because she was very sick, but now she's better and wants to meet you. If you're ready." The child furrowed his brow slightly, processing the information. Maxwell didn't want to pressure him, but felt it was time to start introducing the subject. Several more days passed before the meeting took place. Maxwell made sure Matthias was comfortable with the idea before moving forward. Finally, they agreed that the first meeting would be in the garden of the house, a place where the child felt safe. The day of the encounter arrived. Lucia was nervous, standing a few meters from the garden, observing from outside the house she had only seen from afar for so long. This time, she wouldn't just be an observer. Maxwell went out to greet her, with Matthias behind him, holding his hand tightly. When the child saw Lucia, he didn't know how to react. The woman looked at him with tears in her eyes, but also with great tenderness. Maxwell, still holding his son's hand, bent down to him. "Matthias, this is Lucia. She's your mom." The child looked at her intently, though he didn't say anything immediately. His small eyes reflected curiosity and a certain understanding of what was happening. Lucia crouched down to his level with a trembling smile. "Hello, Matthias," she said softly, trying to control the emotion she felt. It's an honor for me to see you. I've missed you so much all this time. Matthias didn't respond immediately, but then, letting go of Maxwell's hand, he approached Lucia cautiously. Lucia held back tears as she watched Matthias, the child she had left in Maxwell's hands 2 years earlier. Seeing him up close for the first time since that night was an overwhelming mix of emotions that stirred her heart. Matthias, though somewhat confused at first, looked at her with curiosity, as if trying to recognize something familiar in her face. Finally, he took a step toward her and, without saying a word, hugged her tightly, wrapping his small arms around her neck. Lucia hugged him back, feeling as if every broken piece of her heart was beginning to heal. In that moment, Matthias, with his little face resting on her shoulder, whispered with a soft but hopeful voice, "Mommy, you're not sick anymore. You can be with us now." Lucia couldn't contain the tears that started to flow, but she smiled as she hugged him tighter. "I'm better, my love," she replied, stroking his hair. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for you." Matthias, still hugging his mother, looked at Maxwell and smiled. "Daddy, now we'll be a family, right? My mom and you," he said with innocence. Maxwell smiled, but knew he had to be honest with the little one without breaking his heart. "Yes, my love, but your mom has her own home," he replied gently. Matthias frowned and said with a sad voice, "But I want to live with my mom and my dad." Maxwell sighed and looked at him affectionately while caressing his little head. "I understand, but that won't be possible. Your mom and I want the best for you, and we'll always be here to take care of you. Even though we live in different houses." The little one nodded slowly, though he wasn't entirely satisfied with the answer. However, he stayed hugging his mother a while longer, feeling her warmth for the first time. When it came time to say goodbye, Lucia stood up, taking Matthias by the hand, preparing to leave. Alejandro, with a kind gesture, approached. "Can I take you to your house?" he asked Lucia. Lucia looked down and sighed visibly, uncomfortable. "Actually, I'm living in a shelter now. After the illness, I lost everything. I don't have a job." She paused, taking a breath. "I was going to ask you if you could give me a job, something that allows me to get ahead." Maxwell looked at her for a moment in silence, considering. The vulnerability in Lucia's eyes moved him, and he immediately knew the solution. "I have an idea," he responded finally. "What if you stay with us? You can help me with Matthias and at the same time be close to him." Lucia looked at him, surprised, while tears of relief appeared in her eyes. "Would you really allow that?" "Of course," said Maxwell with a faint smile. "It will be best for our son and also for you. This way, both of you can spend time together, and I will also receive the help I need." Matthias, hearing Alejandro's words, let go of his mother's hand and began jumping for joy. "Yes, yes. Mommy is staying with us," he shouted excitedly, with a smile that lit up his little face. Lucia, moved, couldn't contain the tears as she saw her son's happiness. "Thank you," she murmured, looking at Maxwell, unable to believe what was happening. Maxwell smiled as he watched Matthias run around them, not containing his enthusiasm. Lucia felt grateful, and Maxwell knew at that moment that this was the right step for everyone. Although the road ahead would be full of challenges, it was the beginning of a new stage for the three of them. As time passed, the cohabitation between Maxwell, Lucia, and Matthias became more and more natural. Lucia, now recovered, integrated into the daily life of the home, helping to take care of her son and supporting Maxwell in everything she could. What started as a relationship of respect and gratitude for the well-being of Matthias soon turned into something deeper. Maxwell, who had closed his heart after his treacherous marital experience, began to see Lucia as a strong, courageous woman full of love. For her part, Lucia not only found in Maxwell unconditional support, but also discovered over time a man of great nobility who shared the same love for Matthias. Matthias, happy to see his two most important figures in perfect harmony, witnessed how the affection between his mom and dad grew more each day. Family moments became more frequent and special until one day, in the midst of a sunny afternoon in the garden where everything had begun, Maxwell took Lucia's hand and looked into her eyes. "Lucia, we have traveled a path we never imagined. You have brought life back to this house and shown me what true unconditional love is. I want us to be together, not just as parents of Matthias, but as partners for life. Will you marry me?" With tears of emotion, Lucia could do nothing more than nod, and amid hugs of joy and Matthias's excited laughter, she accepted. Thus, surrounded by love and happiness, Maxwell and Lucia got married in an intimate ceremony, sharing their lives and their home as a true family. Matthias finally had his mom and dad together, and the home that once belonged only to Maxwell was now filled with laughter, love, and a happiness he had never imagined. Destiny had brought three souls together at the most unexpected moment, and together, they found the true meaning of family. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the story. Let us know in the comments where you are listening from today. I'm sure the next video appearing on your screen will also move you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming videos. A big kiss and see you in the next story.